Everyone, what if the very people who tell you you can't are actually giving you the fuel to prove them wrong? This is why I love coming to work every day, is to have conversations like the one I had during this episode of Bright Spots in Healthcare. I get to sit down with Dr. Imamu Tomlinson, Moo he goes by, and Moo Tomlinson is a person you want to meet. Unbelievably dynamic, unbelievably smart, and inspiring. He's the CEO of Vituity, and he's also the author of the book Less Than 1%, How Disruptors Defy the Odds. He also hosts a podcast by the same name. We talk about how naysayers can spark innovation, why being disagreeable is actually a leadership strength, and what healthcare could learn from Steph Curry, Bob Marley, and other unlikely disruptors. I also show incredible discipline by not going into more sports and spending the better part of this episode on sports. So if you're not a sports fan, don't worry. We get off it and we tie it all the way back to healthcare, leadership, and innovation. And if you represent a health plan, a hospital system, a medical group, or a solution provider, this conversation will change the way you think about breaking barriers and leading with optimism. Please enjoy this great conversation I get to have with Dr. Moo Tomlinson. Greetings, everyone. This is Eric Glazer, and welcome to Bright Spots in Healthcare, produced by Bright Spots Ventures. Bright Spots Ventures is dedicated to accelerating innovation through content, communities, and meaningful connections. And our mission is simple: to spotlight what's working in healthcare and help scale it. We bring together leaders from health plans, hospitals, and other innovators across the land to share proven strategies that drive measurable impact. And through this very podcast and some of our private events and executive councils and our go-to-market work, we surface and amplify the bright spots in healthcare, proven innovations others can learn from and replicate. At our core, we exist to foster trusted relationships that fuel real progress, because we believe the best way to improve healthcare in our lifetime is to find what's working, find a bright spot, and clone it. If you've not yet subscribed to this wonderful podcast and get access to all of the great information that leaders that we're privileged enough to come on this show provide all of you, we highly recommend you do so. It will help you do your job better and help your organization provide better healthcare to all of us. Today, we are diving into the disruption in healthcare and leadership. And joining us is Dr. Imamu Tomlinson, author of the book Less Than 1%, How Disruptors Defy the Odds. And he's also the host of a podcast by the same name. He's also the chief executive officer of Vituity, a physician-owned and led multi-specialty healthcare partnership with a network of over 6,000 clinicians across more than 690 practice locations. So welcome to the show, Dr. Tomlinson. We'll go by Moo, right? Your friends call you Moo. I just want a quick little background on you, so everyone could get a little bit more of a background and kind of a sense of where you're coming from. You've been exploring what it takes to challenge the status quo for a while, breaking through barriers and inspiring teams to achieve more. And you've been not only looking at healthcare organizations, whether it be running a hospital or building solutions in the industry, but you're also looking at other practical ways in other industries, from sports, entertainment, and other leaders and other exceptional performers in other walks of life on how they rethink obstacles and turn skeptics into fuel and uncover bright spots that you can apply in your own work. So today we're going to have a great conversation, and we're going to dig into insights on overcoming naysayers, the principles of disruption and action, and then lessons from sports and other businesses and some of these incredible leaders and what they're doing so that you can get a forward-looking perspective on healthcare leadership. So let's dive in. We'll start with healthcare, and so much of what I believe holds us back. I worked for a healthcare organization for over 13 years. I know folks who I talk to work at hospitals, health plans. It's It's not just money. It's not just regulations. It's the naysayers. Sometimes it's the culture. Sometimes it's a colleague. Sometimes it's your boss. How do you think about these moments when you're told you can't or it won't work? And how can leaders flip that into fuel for motivation and inspiration to do better?
Oh, well, first I want to say thank you, Eric, for having me. I appreciate what you're doing and pointing out, trying to bring some positivity to healthcare that it can be daunting. And I love what you do. For me, um, I think, and I write about this in my book. I think you can motivate people sometimes, certain people, by saying you can't more than saying you can. And, maybe a little anecdotal, but the book opens with this. It's not about me, but I kind of talk about it a little bit in my book. But I was not the right the right executive for this job. I mean, there were other people who, for different reasons, were better candidates, and I had a lot of people that told me I couldn't be the CEO of $1 million healthcare company, and here it is that I am. So I think that what people need to focus on, there's a workshop that I do when I talk about disruption. I talk about being a disruptor, and I say, write down all the people that said you couldn't. And I think that's especially poignant nowadays. I think that people should always remember who didn't think that they could achieve something. And when they achieve it, I always say, call them up and let them know. So I think it can actually be, now again, it has to be positive. It has to be, an energy that is not anger. But if you can prove people wrong, think of every disruption that has happened in healthcare, frankly, almost in the world, it starts with that premise. Let me show you what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, I love that. That resonates. I actually think about a program that I helped launch around collaborative care in your home country. And my CEO at the time, I was new, CEO came in and said, this can't be done. It won't work. And I remember, to his credit, he came back from a meeting. It was like 2 months into his role. Came back from a meeting in Canada and Toronto with us and some of the big stakeholders, and he said, "Yeah, maybe I was wrong here. Maybe this."
Yeah.
So, and it was incredibly rewarding because it did fuel me a bit. At first, God, yeah, it kind of sent me back, and then I got a little bit stubborn in my convictions. So,
Yeah. Well, shout out to the Toronto. That's my hometown. But mine specifically was a coach. It wasn't a boss. I know you mentioned a boss or even sort of a situation, but I had a coach who was supposed to sort of help me get better and sort of really solidify myself in the middle management role that I had. And he sort of said, "Hey, what executive role could you do?" And I thought about a bunch of them, and I said, "Hey, what about the CEO, former point guard? I feel like I can be inspirational in times, and I wanted to lead. I feel like my lot in life is to help people be more successful." So I said, "What about the CEO?" And he said, "There's no chance." And I said, "There's no chance." I said, "Give me a percent." And he said, "Less than 1%." So I hold grudges, and that's why the book is called Less Than 1%.
And this is a coach that you hired?
Well, it's actually the company that hired it. The partnership hired the coach, and I'll tell you, he's still my coach today.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Oh, gosh. Okay. So let's get in. You mentioned your book, and we're going to talk about a lot of the things that are that you lay out in the book. But there are 3 core traits of disruptors that you lay out in the book: disagreeableness, optimism, and relentlessness. Which of those do you think is most misunderstood, and how have you seen it make the difference in allowing a leader to break through?
Yeah, I think the most misunderstood, and now full disclosure, they can't exist without each other. So they gotta exist together. But I think the one that's the least understood is disagreeableness, right? That's not a term that people often think is a part of leadership. But if you look, a lot of the best leadership books and a lot of the best leaders, their first step is being disagreeable. It means that when you see something that you think isn't right, you got to speak up. That means when you disagree violently sometimes with the status quo, you won't accept poor performance, or you won't accept a poor outcome, especially in healthcare. So disagreeableness is awful understood, and I tell everybody I'm disagreeable. My first step when you tell me anything is to not believe it, and then over time, I use that disagreeableness to learn. And it maybe at the end of it, I come back around and say, you know what? I didn't believe this, but I really researched it and found out that that's the right thing. But more often than not, you're disagreeable and you find out that it's not the right thing. And so really it's a mechanism to learn. But disagreeableness, it's the first step and it's the start of being a disruptor.
Help me reconcile that if the naysayer that should inspire you, and then in some ways now you're saying the principle is that you are a naysayer.
Well, I think, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I wouldn't say that I'm a naysayer. I'm disagreeable. That's two different things. So if you think a naysayer is someone who believes you can't do something, someone who doesn't believe in you, someone for whatever reason, whatever stereotype my coach had of me or whatever situation he was looking at, he's like, there's no way you can do that. That's very different than saying, you know what? I'm not going to accept a poor outcome. I'm not going to accept that, a lot of our, mothers have, child mortality associated with having a baby. Those are a different thing than just being a naysayer, right? And naysayer is also negative, where I feel like someone who's disagreeable is really looking for that next step, which is optimism, right? If you're just disagreeable without optimism, then you're just being a jerk. So it really, that's why I said that they all kind of go together. Because when you take one out of context, you're not really a good disruptor.
So would you put optimism as a nice, obviously it balances disagreeableness. It also is sort of ties to the whole mantra around innovation, and pushing society further. And there's all kinds of great quotes that come out of that. Could you tell us a little bit about what you really mean by optimism? Is it to have that vision of changing, believing you could change the future, a la Apple or some of the other great innovating companies out there, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's imagining the best in the world, the best outcome, the most amazing thing that could happen. So if you think you're disagreeable, you don't like a particular status quo, the next step is to say, well, what would the world be like if that thing could be better? So that's optimism. And I joke with everybody that I wake up every morning and I feel like I'm 6'7", and then through the rest of the day, I find out that I'm a lot shorter than that. I'm really only about 5'9". But my attitude when I wake up in the morning is that I can do anything I put my mind to. Especially those things that I disagree with, especially those things that I think could be better. But I'm optimistic that not only that I can change them, but that I think the world over time can change them.
Okay.
That's not an easy place to be.
It's not. I mean, but it does stay in line. I mean, the famous quote that, a lot of folks probably have on their walls, those who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And so that seems in line with the principles that you're laying out here. And then, relentlessness is powerful and it's needed because there's going to be a lot of getting pushed back and falling down, but it could also lead to burnout. How do you balance that drive with sustainability for yourself and for your teams and everyone else who you're talking to in your workshops?
Yeah, I'm gonna upset a lot of people on your podcast today. I don't believe in burnout. I think that if you have, that just cause, if you have that mission, if you have that energy to be able to change the world, yes, you're going to get tired. Yes, you're going to get sleepy. Yes, you're going to get sore. But burnout means that you no longer want to achieve your just cause. And I don't think that relentlessness really is a description of the fact that I'm always hyper focused on making sure I can impact the world. One thing I tell people about relentlessness, they think that means you never stop. It doesn't mean that you never stop. It just means after you stop, you start again. And then I always tell people, think about what would stop you. Think about that thing that would stop you and then solve for that before you even start. And that way you never really have to stop. But yeah, when I do an exercise with people when I talk about their superpowers, relentlessness is definitely my superpower.
Yeah, there's a great quote and kind of speech by Calvin Coolidge, and it starts with nothing in the world could take the place of persistence. So
Yeah.
I think you're probably a subscriber to that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let's talk about relentlessness and persistence in the framework outside of healthcare, and we'll bring it back to healthcare for folks who are not sports fans here. But I happen to be a big sports fan, and I know Moo is too. So we'll bring in some music too. But you draw from Magic Johnson, Steph Curry, Bob Marley, and other disruptors. When you look at sports and entertainment specifically, what lessons can business and healthcare leaders take from athletes and teams and coaches and performers who consistently defy expectations?
Well, I think you ended it with what frustrates me. Defy expectations. I think that's the problem with sports and draft picks and healthcare. The fact that we have expectations. And so with those expectations, it's not that we want to be right. We just don't want to be wrong. And so Steph Curry is a great example. And Steph Curry, comes out of college when he came out of high school, he's ranked 256 in the country. That's as low as he was ranked at one point. And now everybody says, oh, he's the greatest shooter of all time. He's the top 10 of all time. Well, why didn't you say that when he came out of high school? And the reason you didn't is because you had a framework, you had a standard, you had a convention for what an amazing basketball player looked like. And Steph didn't fit that. And so we have that example in lots of different sports. We have it in healthcare where we create conventions, what I call a convention, which is a rule that shouldn't be a rule. And then we follow that. And we have so much groupthink about what that is. When somebody's an outlier, we call them an outlier. But I think if you look at Steph's history, if you look at the way he approached the game, you look at Bob McKillop, his coach in college, who let him take whatever shot he wanted as long as he worked for it, you realize that he was being groomed for success. And then you have to look at all of his intrinsic values, the family values he inherited, the work ethic he inherited. So I think a lot of times what we do is we focus on those expectations and we're surprised when people defy them. But the truth is we had the wrong expectations to begin with.
So, yeah, I mean, it feels, I want to be very careful that we don't get into psychosocial stuff and politics here, but it seems very much like stereotyping, but in the context of a profession, right? So we got a short, seemingly not extra quick guard in a tall man's sport, and we've never seen anyone like that necessarily excel unless they're super fast and a ball handler, if you will, and that's not who Steph Curry was. And I don't want to bore everyone who's not a basketball fan, but maybe take us through how that operates in healthcare and if there's any way that all of us can figure out gamuts on how to overcome that, so we could look at a Steph Curry, whether it be a person in our organization or an idea within our organization. They're like, okay, that doesn't feel like normal or feel like something that could be successful, but let's strip it down and see if our expectations should be higher.
The tragedy of Steph Curry is not that Steph Curry is now one of the greatest of all time. The tragedy of Steph Curry is how many other Steph Currys did we miss because of our ridiculous expectations of people. And I think that when you look at healthcare or you look at the job that you're applying for, that's really the problem. The problem is that we create systems and structures where we look for a certain kind of individual. But what that does is it limits the amount of greatness there is in the world, right? How many other Steph Currys could there be out there? People who, have amazing work ethic that maybe are a little shorter than they need to be, maybe are a little less athletic than they need to be. But all those other kids, maybe they didn't have Bob McKillop as a coach. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity that Steph Curry had. And I think that you're going to see that in healthcare. You're going to see that in middle schools. You're going to see that, one of the other rants I have is about enrichment programs, where at sixth grade, you identify someone who's really smart. And so I have the best sixth grader in the country or in the class, if you will, that gets put into a special class because he or she is so smart to get extra enrichment. The person that needs the extra enrichment is the kid that isn't smart in sixth grade. But we do that, right? Eric, we try to pick winners and losers before the game is even run. And Steph Curry has proven to us that after the game is run, that he's one of the best of all time. So the CEO that I am now, that's after the fact, but we can't pick winners and losers before the game is even played.
And do you have any tips for us, whether it's hiring? And I don't know if you could put it into context for rather than look at a human being, but also look at an idea or process that comes up that we think the expectation of that is it's not going to work, and trying to figure out, is that something different? Is that the Steph Curry idea? Is that the Steph Curry, head of sales that we did or not? Like, how do we, because I'll say this, our brain was built to create shortcuts. This is a survival technique. It's a survival technique. We use past history to predict future performance. That's just how we do it, right? And so, it would have, we missed a few Steph Currys, maybe. That's the tragedy, but 9 out of 10 times, probably right. So how do we, as innovators in healthcare that can't afford to miss with Steph Curry, how do we do that? How do we find our innate?
So I think what we do for other people is what we want for ourselves. I think that if we look at our unique talents or unique skills, the best thing in the world is to be your 100% authentic self and use your superhero skill to be able to change the world. But to get that, for me as the CEO, to get that, I have to allow others to do that also. And what that means is, I think you're right. I think people are sort of like, hey, Moo's relentless. I want to find other relentless people. But I also have to realize that at the end of the Marvel movie, there wasn't one kind of superhero standing in a circle ready to fight the aliens. There were multiple people there, and they all had different skills, and together they saved the world. And so that's, I think, the thing that we all need to do is really look and say, okay, Moo, you're this, sort of combination of skills and deficits, but I have to allow others to have different skills and deficits. And so then I got to open my mind a little bit to say, okay, you know what, you're a little introverted, or you know what, you're a little angry, or you're a little sad, or you're a little melancholy, or but focus on that person's special skill instead of focusing on their deficits.
I love that. One of my, just to bring it back to healthcare, and I'll go, I'm not going to mention names here in case they're listening, but one of my prouder moments when I was in the industry was I was in a commercial role, and a lot of the people that worked for me came from clinic. Okay. And so we're interviewing for this particular role, and this particular individual was ex-cop, ex-nurse, with no commercial experience whatsoever. But had all of the skills, the personality, the tenacity. There was so much like raw talent. And fortunately, I remember this vividly because my boss saw the same thing, agreed with me, and we ended up picking this person over what others would have looked like when they were looking at the paper and the LinkedIn profiles, more qualified. And that person is still kicking butt in that role today. And so you just kind of have to look past those things, but it's hard to do. And
it is hard to do.
It's hard to do if you have naysayers with you and fight in those battles, because we're a CYA moment. But if you have that chutzpah, you could create great companies that way.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to write about it. Again, like I mentioned, the book isn't about me, but I think it's about a lot of different, to your point, industries and a lot of different moments that we get where we say, wow, this is how it should be. And I always try to stop myself and say, okay, what am I really saying? What am I really saying? Like, what more can I get out of this situation? It's helped me, even being a parent. The fact that my kids, even though they're supposed to be exactly the same as I am, they're different, and giving them the space to be authentically themselves and really not focus on their deficits, but focus on their strengths, and making myself a little open to that. Now, listen, I'm disagreeable. So a lot of times I question it. Like, why are you doing that? My son, why are you doing that? I'm also optimistic. I know he's going to be able to change the world with his special skills. And I know that not only is he going to be continuing to work at what he's doing, but as a parent, I have to be relentless in that support, right? I have to be relentless in supporting him to be exactly who he needs to be so he can change the world.
Well, on that note, when he's doing things to successfully change the world, when we were prepping, you said to me something that I thought was really interesting. People are more open to change after a win than after a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk to me how this plays out in healthcare and where wins can be hard to define and or measure, and how do we take those wins and then use those wins as managers, as leaders, as CEOs to drive positive change in our organizations?
Yeah, I'll try to make a long story short here. So think of, do you remember the Challenger disaster?
I remember where it was.
Devastating.
It was a Tuesday. I was in midterms.
Yeah.
I was home. Yeah.
Devastating, right? And you remember all the hoopla about the O-rings, this small little thing that got too cold, and it was cold in Florida. It ended up leaking and you had this big explosion. And remember, after this devastating event happened, they shut down the program for 2 years. They were like, listen, we're just not going to fly. We have to investigate this. We have to make sure that this never happens again, which sounds like a reasonable thing to do after a big time loss like that. But if you look back throughout the history of the shuttle program, there were lots of O-wing problems. There were lots of other problems, but because they landed, they didn't do any investigation. They didn't change the entire program because they landed, they won. So I looked up, there's a study that I looked at and said, when are people the most receptive to change? Is it after a win or after a loss? Now, most people would say it's after a loss. You see those coaches bellowing at their teams after a loss. You didn't get that deal. You have a big meeting. And, but the truth is that they did a study with endorphins and neurotransmitters and really looked at when people were the most receptive to change. And that was after a win. So the key for the shuttle program and for your meeting tomorrow, after your win, that's when you sit down with people and say, hey, you can be better here. You can be better there. We can do this better. After a loss, you might just say, hey, you know what? Let's get this next time and walk out the room, because they're not receptive to change at that point. They're already sad and bent out of shape about maybe a mistake that the team made. So it's very, it's logical now when you think about it, but it's actually pretty profound if we could live our lives where we only correct it after we win.
It is so counterintuitive, right?
It is. It is. I do it too. The minute I lose, I have a bad day, a bad shift, or a bad quarter, I'm ready to lean in. But the truth is that everybody's feeling bad at that point. So maybe that's not the best time to lean into change management.
Wow. Yeah. That's great story. Great metaphor. Let's bring it home with some final questions, and let's talk global. You mentioned you're from the 416. Shout out to Toronto. So you bring a Canadian perspective to the U.S. healthcare leadership and the U.S. healthcare system. When you're looking globally, and I don't know if you have a lot of exposure to other healthcare systems, but where do you see cultural blind spots, and maybe what global lessons might leaders in the U.S. embrace disruption more effectively? Like how can we figure out ways to disrupt and innovate that maybe we're blind to when we're just like stuck in this country looking at the dynamics of this healthcare system that we could learn from other countries?
Yeah, I mean, first step, right? If you look at our healthcare system, if we apply those tenets, those disruptive tenets and say, let's disagree. Let's say that, hey, this healthcare system can be better. That would be my premise, to say, I disagree with the fact that this is the best in the world. How can it be better? And the next step is optimistic. How can I make it better? I'm the one to do that. You can look at other countries or other situations and see how people have innovated. They've done amazing things, sometimes with less resources. And so I think there are examples out there as we may be an example in other ways to the rest of the world. But I think that there are sort of innovations out there that we could take a look at. And I think specifically some of those countries that really struggle with resources, they're working with almost no resources, and they're still getting some outcomes, some decent outcomes, or at least improving outcomes. So I think if we look at that, sometimes I think our healthcare system has a lot of resources with it, and I think that sometimes we're not as innovative as we could be as a result of that.
And as we close out things, and you have a podcast, right?
Yes.
Percent How Disruptors Defy the Odds. That's the same title as the book. So if you check that out on Apple, you can find it there. I always I steal this question from another well-known podcast, but I love getting book recommendations. And so what is the book or books that you've given most as a gift, and maybe why?
Well, I think most as a gift, it would be two books. From my days of AAU basketball coaching, I used to give this book out, and I still give it out. It's actually right on my shelf right behind me here. But Outliers would be one by Malcolm Gladwell. The second one is David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, and obviously he's my favorite author. But I think with David and Goliath, that one really has changed my mind as far as the way the world works. I mean, it's in some level, it's why I wanted to write my book, because it really talks about the advantages of disadvantages. The fact that what people believe are advantages aren't always advantages, and some things that people believe are disadvantages are actually advantages, right? And Malcolm starts with the story of David and Goliath, which is supposed to be a disruptor story. It's supposed to be something that isn't predictable. But at the end of the day, when you look at it and Malcolm breaks it down, you realize that David actually had the advantage. The fact that he was small, the fact that he knew how to shoot a slingshot, et cetera, means that we were looking at the wrong thing. We were looking at the bigness of Goliath and the strength of Goliath, but we really weren't assessing the situation.
I love that. I won't throw in a book recommendation, but you said the advantages of disadvantages. I'll throw in a TED Talk. People Google Dixon Shabanda and why I train grandmothers to treat depression. That's taking advantages of a disadvantage. If folks want to get 12 minutes of wisdom there. Moo, this was great. This is great. I'd love to talk more hoops with you, but I think we will bore some people. Although some people,
yeah. Thank you so much, Eric. And remember, I know you're in Boston, so I'm coming. My daughter's the smallest basketball player in the ACC, so I'm going to come out and hang out with you. We can watch.
I checked that out when we met last. Yeah, it's super cool. I'd love to do it. But not very. It's actually I lived right by there for a long time. Not anymore. I'm too old to live by there now. But yeah, I'm right by. It was right by BC, and I'm not far from there now. I want to thank everyone who's taking the time to tune in today. We do not take any of the time you spend with us for granted. We know you're super busy and you have all kinds of choices on how to spend that time. And we hope we use the bright spots and the ideas and the concepts shared today to inspire your thinking and enhance your organization's current approach to improving healthcare for all of us. We produce this show for you. And remember, this is your Bright Spots in Healthcare podcast. Take care, everyone.